We live in a democracy in which it's exceedingly difficult to do things together. We're polarized. We live in communities in which we don't often talk to people who are different from us. But to solve problems in community, we need to talk across divides. We need to reach those neighbors who have a different political flag, who may even speak a different language, because we can't solve problems without that.
Welcome to Being the Change, the official podcast of James Madison University. Brought to you by Madison Magazine. Each episode brings you stories of how members of the JMU community combine intellect with action to live lives of purpose and meaning. That's being the change.
What's up, JMU? Welcome to Being the Change. Andy Perrine here. Today is a special edition for the honoring of Constitution Day, which we do every year at James Madison University. We've got a special responsibility as the university named for the father of the U.S. Constitution to celebrate Constitution Day, which we've done for many years. And we've got a very special guest on the broadcast, Dr. Peter Levine, who is the Tisch College Lincoln Filene Professor of Citizenship and Public Affairs at Tufts University, is a national leader in not only understanding what civic life means and how it operates, but also how to teach it. Dr. Levine, welcome to campus.
Thank you so much. It's great to be here.
It's so glad to have you. And we also have two other guests, and they've both been on the podcast before, Dr. David Kirkpatrick and Dr. Kara Dillard. Kara is currently the director of the Madison Center for Civic Engagement, and David was the former director of the Madison Center for Civic Engagement, who is now chief of staff, and he spends most of his time chasing President Jim around, right?
That's right. It's a good job.
Welcome to both of you.
Thanks
for having us.
Well, so Dr. Levine is on campus to give a talk tonight, and his talk is The Role of Civic Life in Contemporary Democracy. And we're going to explore that theme. And Dr. Levine, just to get us started, why don't you give us your description of what civic life is, and put it into the context of, contemporary democratic republic and how all of us ought to think about it.
I think probably the way to start is with something really concrete that people can just envision, which is people getting together to talk about a problem and work on solving it. That's the basis of democracy, and that's I would call civic life.
And one of your books is called What Should We Do? And you make a great distinction that it's not what should I do, it's what should we do?
That's right. There's two reasons for that. One, then I can put it bluntly. By myself, I'm dumb and I'm weak. By myself, I can't accomplish much, and I also don't know much. So I need to be with other people.
And how do you see the U.S. Constitution, since we're celebrating Constitution Day, how do you see the Constitution shaping civic life today?
It protects it in some ways because we have a right to association and a right to free speech in the Constitution, in the Bill of Rights, and so that's it's an outer limit that allows us to have civic life. On the other hand, the Constitution is also, because it's an 18th century document, doesn't mention a lot of the components of civic life at all, right? That we actually have. It doesn't talk about labor unions or even corporations or lobbies or media companies or social media. So you have to read a lot of new stuff into it.
Well, and how do those kind of norms develop over time in accordance with the Constitution?
I think the Constitution has afforded us the freedom to experiment. I also think I don't mean to, on Constitution Day at James Madison University, to undermine the importance of the Constitution, but I would say a lot of the forms of civic life that have developed are very common across the world, or at least across democracy. So Britain doesn't have a written constitution at all, but they have largely similar civic life. So a lot of what's happened is been driven by other things like technology and just human creativity.
Sure. And before we started recording, we were both talking about being at Montpelier and being in Madison's study. He was a vast reader. And could you describe some of the influences that he took from as he was helping to frame the Virginia Plan, which eventually became the first draft of the Constitution?
I mean, specifically, he was reading classical, early modern, and French and British political theory. I love the way they have, at least when I was there last, which was a while ago, they have some ink that he dropped, that he spilled under plexiglass. And the ink is supposed to be ink he was using to take notes as before he went to Philadelphia. So he's supposed to have been taking notes about political philosophy that he read, and they've preserved it, which I would do too. I mean, I wouldn't let people walk on the ink, but I do think it's a little bit of it makes it sacred.
For sure,
it gives it a feeling of very much like a relic.
Yeah,
and that's part of a kind of constitutional religion that we have in the United States, which has both strength. There are good things and bad things about treating the Constitution as somewhat sacred.
What are some of the bad things?
I think that it's first of all, it's very unusual to do that because there are other well-functioning democracies where they don't treat as sacred their constitution, and we do have the oldest written constitution in the world. So I guess the strengths of you asked about the negatives. I'll get to that in a second. The positives is that it's a common framework that is shareable by anybody who's an American citizen, and so it's inclusive. So you can come here as an immigrant and you can join the Constitution. So it gives us a way of being one people without it being tied to religion or ancestry. I think the disadvantage is it's a very rigid and hard to change document, and it's the oldest in the world, and also it tends to seem as if it's going to solve our problems when to have the Constitution, when actually the Constitution allows a tremendous amount of behavior of different kinds that's not going to get stopped by the Constitution itself.
Right.
So it's very, to put it a little more bluntly, we often have taught American students, I learned it this way. This is the Constitution, it'll be here forever. It's the way things work. This is how you use it. It's kind of the software, and this is how you use it. They don't teach constitutions like that in other countries because they don't expect them to be there in that way. And I think there are pros and cons.
Well, speaking of teaching, David and Kara, bringing these concepts to students and helping them to understand how this document animates civic life has been something that you've been working on for years at the Madison Center. Describe how you make this relevant to our current students. They're so polite, they're pointing at each other. Kara, you go ahead.
One of the things that I think I'm sort of the most appreciative of here at JMU is we have a brand new civic leadership minor that really takes the concepts that Peter is talking about. In fact, we use the book, What Should We Do, as sort of the foundational text of that class to say, that we live in a democracy in which it's exceedingly difficult to do things together. We're polarized. We live in communities in which we don't often talk to people who are different from us, but to solve problems in community, we need to talk across divides. We need to reach those neighbors who have a different political flag, who may even speak a different language, because we can't solve problems without that. And so the civic leadership minor is really teaching some of these basic foundational concepts of how do we exist in civic life? How do we exist in democracy? And that minor says, here's how we exist. We exist together. We exist to solve problems together. And we exist to solve problems together across divides. And so that minor teaches students the practical skills of what does that look like? And also says that that's really difficult to do, but we've got to work through those pain points and we've got to get through the risky parts because that's vital to democracy.
Well, I think Madison and Federalist 10 highlighted the fact that we really need to celebrate plurality because it balances, and we need one side to rebalance the other. How do students respond when you bring that concept to them, David?
Yeah, and I would also circle back to your earlier question, Andy, and one of the things I think we've done well at JMU is building an ecosystem for intellectual diversity. And we hear from students, we can write them off and saying they don't actually care about the political, they don't actually care about the polis, they don't care about the things that are bringing us together. What they don't care about often is the blood sport of politics. They don't care about the polarization. They actually care deeply about the values. And so one of the things I think we've done well, Dr. Dillard and many others, and one of the things we've made values on is creating so many different on-ramps for valuing. Dr. Levine mentioned the Constitution gives us this broad array of expression, of religion, of practice. And so, everything from before students come on campus, they're doing modules in freedom of speech and expression. How are they forming their values. Our Better Conversations program, Dr. Diller just mentioned to me, over 4,000 students of our first year signed up for deliberative forums of developing skills of dialogue across difference. So that's a difference. We assess then every student on campus, are we moving the needle? Intellectual humility, affective polarization, and we see we are. We just broke ground in a living learning community in intellectual diversity and civic leadership right on our quad. So we're signaling this is a deeply held value. And then we know we'll only go as far as our faculty bring us. So we have a great faculty fellows program in those bringing difficult issues into the conversation. So it's not just we have this program, or it's not just, we read this book, but how do we create the water that we swim in? This is who we are as JMU. And so then those are, rather than saying boo to the national discourse or boo, to what we see, we're raising up these are the heroes and here's the discourse we want to see. And so we've seen, to circle back to your question, students really embracing that they do have the skills, they do have the confidence to then be those change makers and step into that world.
Well, you use the word blood sport when you talked about politics. So many Americans feel completely disconnected from the system. Dr. Levine, what is your assessment of the current state of our civic life?
There's a lot to worry about. There's probably some good things which we should remember to think about as well, but there's a lot to worry about. I think David mentioned affective polarization, which is people not disagreeing, but that's a different problem, but people not liking each other and really not liking each other, according to especially their party ID. But then partisanship also goes along with demographics, so this is also a division between, for example, rural and urban America. So which
has been around a long time. It's just more heightened now.
Yeah, the level of, I think we can kind of document that the level of actual dislike has risen a lot.
Yeah.
So there's a regular survey question that's been asked for a long time, for at least since the 60s, which is to rate the members of the other party on a scale from 1 to 10, or 0 to 10. And the proportion of Democrats and Republicans who rate the other party at 0 used to be virtually none.
Right.
And now it's the majority in both parties, and it's a very symmetrical looking graph. So
the other side isn't just wrong, they're evil.
Yeah. So that's an aspect. And then there's also probably a pretty widespread feeling of disconnect with the formal system, some of which is based on very great realities. I mean, most electoral districts are not at all competitive. Basically, the politicians have chosen the voters rather than the voters choosing the politics. And there's, I think this is more controversial, harder to prove, and it's fine to disagree with it, but I think that the record of both the Congress and state legislatures in actually making legislation, making law, is just extremely poor in the last 25 years. So, for example, in the time that the undergrads at JMU have been alive, the United States Congress has not passed any landmark legislation at all, either liberal or conservative. Whereas in the 1960s, they passed a landmark bill every few months. So there's a way in which it just doesn't look good. When the best that a Congress or a state legislature can do is to scrape together a budget agreement at the last minute, usually way after the deadline, and solve a lot of social problems through the budget negotiations. That's not legislation. We could go on. There's more. I could keep talking.
Well, you did say there were some bright spots.
Yeah, there's a lot of grassroots level work that's good. People actually organizing and solving problems together, and I think it's not all micro either. It's not all super small. A lot of cities, I think, including fairly big cities, are centers for civic work.
We'll be right back.
I'd like to move on to our role in all of this, because as educators, this is something that all of us have a role to play in educating the upcoming generations on how this can work better, and so that maybe we can resolve, as Dr. Levine was describing, this complete antipathy for people who disagree with us in a way that we've never seen before. Every time I meet with our students and we talk about things like this, I get full of hope. I'm hopeful when I talk to our students, and you're with them all the time. Carol, what are you seeing?
I think it's, to speak to Dr. Levine's point, I think it's really interesting. This is a generation that for most of their time has grown up with the most toxic of social media. Social media can be helpful, but it can also be really harmful. So, I was worried in November of last year at the presidential election that we would have, a significant amount of students not vote.
Sure.
But one of the things that really surprised me was come election day that we had students in our on-campus polling location at Godwin Hall standing in line for 2 hours getting ready to vote because they felt that was really important. And I think moreover, it speaks to the mindset that JMU students think of themselves in their role of civic engagement as being voters, that is something that, even despite all of the negative environment that they live in, that the thing that they take to be most important is that thing to vote. And they're willing to stand in line during school day for 2 hours to go and vote. And I take that as a sign of hope.
Me too.
I was just going to say one of the encouraging things, and this is not necessarily students, but one of the reasons why Dr. Levine's voice has been so important is he was focusing on these things before it became en vogue.
Sure,
but I
right.
actually don't mind when a lot of this has, the fact that this has become en vogue. A lot of university presidents, a lot of boards, a lot of legislatures are encouraging universities. And I think higher ed's taken some heat in areas that we don't deserve. There's also areas that we need to grow a lot in. And so there's been a massive emphasis on dialogue across difference, intellectual diversity. And so to the extent that encourages us to help students come in and say at a public university, I'm going to expect people are going to be different than me. I'm going to expect they're going to have deeply held beliefs that are different than me. And they're going to make my beliefs better and stronger. I'm going to understand myself better. I'm going to understand how I can impact the world better. And so, I'm seeing students lean into that where it can feel. I was at a forum with some university presidents, and I won't say who it was, but one of the presidents stood up and said, who else is doing this? Who else is bringing people genuinely from across the political divide into conversations? We talk about the classroom and professors. And he said, I actually think we're doing this pretty well. And so I also, want to say, I think higher ed's taken a lot of heat. Who else is genuinely bringing people together across the political spectrum to learn from experts, to learn from each other, to have dialogue together? These are the encouraging stories where I think we have pieces here of the solutions, and our students are hungry for that. They know enough of the problems. They certainly can stroll on TikTok enough to know, we're divided and there's a lot of issues. Where are the solutions? And to Dr. Levine's, title of his book, What Should We Do? There's a hunger for that to the extent that we can raise up those voices and models and say, here's actually what we can do. There's a hunger for that.
We get beat up a lot, and we might be the only ones trying at this point, right? Well, you bring up TikTok, David, and Carrie, your expertise is in deliberative democracy, and you've said in past conversations that we need to go where they are. These isolating technologies work against what should we do, as Dr. Levine says. How are you meeting students where they are when these technologies really kind of isolate us?
It's important that we get students here on campus, when they come to campus, that we put them in conversation with each other across those divides. And so every year for our first year students, we ask them to participate in our Better Conversations Together program, and that they sit down together in small groups in which they have a peer there, another undergraduate student who is trained in facilitation, to help them have a difficult conversation, whether that's on AI, whether that is what should the future of higher education be? What does success look like? What should success be? And what can we expect when we graduate 4 years from now? Those are really difficult questions for our students to think through, but it's important that they think through them together in their first semester of college. One of the things, and we just kicked off this year's Better Conversations program last Friday, and we asked students, raise your hand, who just wants to have conversations and not fight about it, but to have meaningful conversations where we can listen and hear each other and talk about it. And every student will raise their hands. To David's point, they're hungry for these kinds of skills and these kinds of concepts that at JMU that we're deeply valuing from the minute these students come to campus, and that we're giving them the opportunity. And it's scary. A lot of these students will come in and say, I'm really nervous about this. I'm nervous to share who I am, but I'm going to take that breath. And we have our facilitator say, just take a breath and let's do this. And they will lean into it. And I think that is so powerful. And then they go and they tell their roommate, they go and tell people in their majors that you can do this too. And I think we see the spillover effect that's really wonderful and gives not just those students, but other students hope that we can have conversations across divides.
And we know from our annual freshman survey that the student body is showing up basically 1/3 conservative, 1/3 liberal, and 1/3 I don't know, right? So there is a mix in those groups. So it is exciting, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, we purposefully sit them together with people who identify as liberal or moderate or conservatives, and sometimes they say, I don't know. Sometimes they say, I'm not going to tell you. But we ask them, we say at the end of the conversation, everybody share what they kind of identify with, and it's wonderful to see people go, oh, can we talk more about that? Because I'm really interested in your perspective.
That's so hopeful. Well, speaking of hope, Dr. Levine, looking forward, since you give this so much thought, what does civic life look like in 10, 20 years when our current students are actually out there living as citizens and adults?
You're asking me to predict? I mean, if it's going to get better, we have to figure out the challenge of scale, I think, because there's plenty of good stuff happening, but it's hard to make it big. You asked about TikTok, and one of the things about TikTok is it's big.
Right.
There are actually great online spaces, but they tend to have 150 people in them, and the big social media platforms have 1 billion people on them.
Right.
I think higher ed actually is at scale, and there's I think about 20 million college students.
Yeah,
if I'm not
between
mistaken.
18 and 20 typically. Yeah.
Good. I'm glad you know. So what you guys do here, where you have every student coming in doing some of the deliberative work, is great. We don't actually have a requirement like that, but colleges are a platform that can go to scale. So is K-12, and I have worked a lot on K-12 civic education. Hard to go to scale for anything other than those school settings. Right. Particularly the social media platform. The issue is not that there's something wrong with digital communication. I think the issue is that the platforms are 5 or 6 platforms that are have 1 billion or so people on them, and that are very badly designed for discourse, that are designed in fact to capture maximum levels of anger in order to, because it pays. So that we have to fix questions of money and scale.
Right, and there's a lot of concern also about the fourth estate at this point in the current reality in media, and now that a lot of media is driven, like you say, Dr. Levine, it's driven by wanting to produce outrage. We've got to recognize that as a culture, that lies move at a much faster velocity than truth does. That's a real challenge.
We also just don't actually pay for much journalism.
Right.
So the coverage of, for example, state legislatures and city councils just often don't have anybody covering them at all. And that's also a problem that's not technological. Sure. I don't think it's that much about demand, because I think people are actually kind of interested, but there's no mechanism for actually paying people a salary.
Right. Well, tonight you're going to speak about the role of civic life. What do you hope to hear from students during the Q&A portion?
Yeah, I mean, I think I would love to have them ask Dr. Levine, what does being a good citizen today look like? What are the qualities that I should take that would make me a good citizen, that would support democracy?
How would you answer that, Dr. Levine?
It's a good question, and I bet some version of it might come up.
Yeah.
I mean, I probably would go to the idea that a lot of the most important work we do as citizens is in voluntary associations that we create and support. And most Americans are not in any organization at all.
We've had Robert Putnam on campus talking about that.
Yeah. So this is Robert Putnam's thesis. But there's a value to being in an organization. I mean, you have to care about other people and like them. But there's also lots of nuts and bolts skills. So there are many people who don't know how, and I don't blame them, but because it doesn't come naturally, but don't know how to have a effective meeting, for example. I'm not even talking about a meeting which is about deeply divided issues. I'm actually just talking about a meeting that figures out how to raise money for the annual fund.
Yeah, right.
But things like keeping track of what you're doing at any given moment in a meeting. Are we venting? Are we voting? And then recording what you decided so that you don't have to have the conversation from scratch the next time.
Right.
And I know sounds like I'm going on a tangent, but I would say that knowing those things is my answer.
Yeah.
So what is a good citizen? Is somebody who knows that stuff.
Nuts and bolts.
Yeah. Not everybody doesn't have to know all of it,
Right.
because you can sort of specialize in the accounting, or you can specialize in the social media. But we have to have people who can do all those things in groups.
Right.
And Andy, I think what you just saw too, what I would love our students to see is how important experts are. What an interesting time in our country where expertise is on trial or disregarded. But what you just saw from Dr. Levine is deep research on what's made social movements effective. It's a lot of what he researches. And so people want to get to the action part, and people want to, have the passion and the energy. The value of those who've done that deep research, and again, the position of higher education, to learn from experts in whatever it is that you want to accomplish or what your deeply held values. I want to see our students lean in on the value of learning from their professors, from experts, from outside people, and raising that up. In this moment when those things are not valued as highly, I think JMU can be this place where, in something like civic life, where are the solutions, and here's how they're informed by those who have dedicated their entire lives to thinking about those things.
Well, looking forward to celebrating Dr. Levine's expertise this evening at the Constitution Day event. I'm so thankful for all three of you being with us. Maybe if you come back to campus, Dr. Levine, you come talk to us again?
Absolutely.
That would be great.
Certainly enjoyed it.
Well, thank you three. And remember, all of our listeners, if you've got ideas for other episodes or just want to get in touch, we can be reached at beingthechange@jmu.edu. Until next time, go Dukes.
Thanks for listening. Subscribe to hear more stories about how members of the JMU community are being the change. Dive deeper and explore countless other stories at jmu.edu/Madison Magazine. Go Dukes!
The Being the Change podcast was conceived by Jim Heffernan, editor of Madison Magazine, and me, Andy Perrine, head of JMU Marketing. Thanks to Jenna Polk and her team at the Rose Library Studios, where the show is recorded by Cody Troyer, Steve Adderton, and Olive Santos, all of the crazy talented JMU photo video team, who then produced the final episodes at the Ice House in downtown Harrisonburg. Original music by 2019 alumnus Neil Perrine. You can find the Being the Change podcast on all the popular platforms where we hope you'll like, share, and subscribe.